The wind on Colony Rill was never gentle. It came in from the salt flats every evening and rattled the metal roofs like it was trying to peel them off. Daniel Reyes was used to that sound. He had lived on the edge of this dusty world for 6 years, ever since the war ended and the government gave him a plot of land instead of a medal. He liked it that way. No parades, no speeches, just quiet work and quiet nights. That evening, the wind carried something new. A streak of orange light cut across the sky, too slow to be a shooting star and too fast to be a shuttle on approach. Daniel stood outside his workshop, wrench still in hand, and watched it fall somewhere past the ridge, near the old mining trenches. Most people in the colony would have called it in and waited for the patrol drones to check it out. Daniel was not most people. He grabbed his jacket, a flashlight, and the small pistol he kept for wild dogs and walked out into the dark. The trenches were an hour's walk from his house, cut deep into red rock by machines that had stopped running long before he arrived. He found the crash site by the smoke first, a thin grey line rising against the stars. What was left of the pod looked nothing like human tech. It was shaped like a teardrop, its shell cracked open like an egg, and the metal was warm even in the cold night air. Inside, curled up against torn cushioning, was something that made Daniel stop breathing for a second. It was small, no bigger than a large dog, with scales the color of dried blood and wings folded tight against its body. Its eyes were closed. Its sides moved up and down in short, shaky breaths. A baby dragon. He had heard stories about the Draasa, the reptilian empire that controlled half the systems bordering human space, but he had never seen one up close and never one this small. He should have called the colony council. He should have contacted the border patrol and let trained people handle whatever this was. Instead, Daniel knelt down in the dirt and reached out a hand, slow and careful, the way he used to approach frightened animals back on Earth. The creature flinched at his touch, then went still, too weak to fight. Up close, he could see the damage. One of its wings was bent wrong. Its scales along the belly were thin and pale, not the deep color of the rest of its body. This was not an accident. This was a hatchling that had been thrown away. Daniel had read enough news reports to understand the Draasa custom, even if he did not agree with it. Weak hatchlings, ones born with flaws or during hard times, were placed in discard pods and sent drifting into space, left to die quietly, far from the Dominion's worlds, so no one had to watch. This one had drifted farther than most, all the way into human territory, and crashed instead of dying in the cold silence between stars. He carried it back to his house, wrapped in his jacket. It weighed more than he expected, and by the time he reached his door his arms were shaking, but he did not stop walking. Colony Council did not take the news well. Victor, the administrator, came to Daniel's house the next morning with 2 other men and a long list of reasons why keeping the creature was a bad idea. Draasa patrol ships passed through this sector twice a month. If they found out a colonist was hiding one of their own, even a discarded one, it could break the fragile peace treaty holding human and Draasa space apart. Victor wanted to hand the hatchling over to the next patrol and be done with it. Daniel refused. He stood in his doorway, blocking the entrance, and reminded Victor of the colony charter, the one written after the war, which said any sentient being in distress had the right to shelter until it could be safely relocated. Nobody in the room could say for certain the hatchling counted as a person, but nobody could prove it didn't either. Victor backed down, grumbling, but made it clear this was Daniel's problem now, not the colony's. That night, Daniel sat on the floor of his workshop with the hatchling curled in a nest of old blankets. It had not eaten anything he offered. Its breathing was still too fast, too shallow. He did not know if it would survive the week. "You need a name," he said quietly, mostly just to fill the silence. He thought about grand names, names that sounded like they belonged to legends. None of them felt right. In the end, he picked something simple, something that reminded him of the wildflowers that used to grow near his childhood home before the war took the land away. "Daisy," he said, "that's you now." The hatchling's eyes opened, just barely, 2 thin slits of gold catching the workshop light. It did not understand the word. It could not have, but something in Daniel's voice made it stop shaking just for a moment, and that was enough for him to decide. He did not know yet what raising a discarded dragon would cost him, or what it would mean years down the line when the Dominion came looking. He only knew that something small and broken had fallen out of the sky and landed in his hands, and he was not going to let it die alone in the dark the way someone else had intended. Outside, the wind kept blowing across the salt flats, carrying the smoke from the crash site slowly into nothing, erasing any proof that anything had ever fallen from the sky at all. 3 years is a long time to keep a secret in a colony where everyone knows everyone's business. Daniel Reyes managed it anyway, though it cost him more sleep than he liked to admit. Daisy grew fast, faster than any child, faster than any animal Daniel had ever raised. What had once fit in his arms now stood taller than his waist, with wings that had healed crooked but strong, and scales that had deepened from pale red to a rich, dark maroon. She was smart too, smarter than he expected, picking up words within months and full sentences within a year. By the time she was 3, she talked more than most human toddlers twice her age, and she asked questions that Daniel sometimes struggled to answer. Keeping a growing dragon hidden on a small colony was not easy. Daniel built a shelter behind his house, half dug into the hillside, cool in summer and warm in winter, with thick walls that muffled sound. He told his neighbors it was a storage cellar. Most of them believed him. A few, like Rosa the colony doctor and Victor the administrator, knew the truth and chose to look the other way, though for very different reasons. Rosa came by twice a month, officially to check on Daniel's old shoulder injury from the war, unofficially to check on Daisy. She had been a battlefield medic once, and nothing seemed to shock her anymore. The first time she saw Daisy up close, she simply crouched down, looked the young dragon in the eye, and asked how her wing was healing. Daisy liked her instantly. Victor was different. He never came to the shelter, never asked to see Daisy, and made it clear every chance he got that this arrangement made him nervous. But he also never reported it. Daniel suspected Victor had his own reasons for staying quiet, old debts from the war that Daniel had never asked him to repay, but that Victor seemed to remember anyway. The hardest part was not hiding Daisy's body, it was hiding her heart. Daisy was kind in a way that surprised Daniel. She worried about the colony's stray cats. She cried, actual tears, the first time Daniel explained that some animals got sick and died even when nobody wanted them to. She asked Rosa detailed questions about how human bodies worked, then asked just as many questions about her own body, trying to understand why she was different, and why that difference had once made someone throw her away like broken equipment. Daniel answered as honestly as he could, though some answers were harder to give than others. One evening, while Daisy was practicing her letters on an old data tablet Daniel had fixed up for her, a patrol ship passed low over the colony. It was a Draasa scout, sleek and silver, moving slow enough that it was clearly doing a routine sweep rather than searching for anything specific. Still, the sound of its engines was enough to make Daisy freeze mid-sentence, tablet forgotten in her claws, eyes wide with a fear that had no clear source but felt very real to her. Daniel moved fast. He grabbed her by the shoulder and pulled her down into the underground shelter, sealing the heavy door behind them. They sat together in the dark for almost 6 hours, listening to nothing but their own breathing, until Rosa finally knocked the all-clear signal on the outer hatch. Daisy did not cry that time. She just sat very still, wings wrapped tight around herself, and asked Daniel a question that had been building inside her for a long time. Why did they leave me? Daniel had been dreading this question since the night he found her in the crashed pod. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and thought carefully before answering. He told her the truth as best he understood it, that the Draasa had strict rules about which hatchlings were allowed to live, rules based on strength and bloodline, rules that had nothing to do with kindness or worth. He told her that being left behind was not because something was wrong with her, but because someone else's rules had decided she didn't fit, and rules like that were often wrong. You're not broken, Daniel said. You're not weak. You survived a fall through space that would have killed most things twice your size. That's not nothing, Daisy. That's not something to be ashamed of. Daisy was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes reflecting the dim light of the shelter. Do you think they'll come looking for me someday? She asked. Daniel did not have a good answer for that. He had thought about it many nights, staring at the ceiling of his house, wondering what he would do if a Draska ship ever landed with orders to take her away. He did not know the answer. He only knew what he would choose, no matter what the law said. "If they come," he said, "you won't face them alone. That's a promise." Daisy leaned against him, her scaled shoulder warm despite the cold shelter air, and for the first time in hours, she finally relaxed. Neither of them knew it yet, but that scout ship passing overhead was not just a routine sweep. Somewhere in its brief scan of the colony, a signal had been logged, filed away, and forgotten by most, but not all. Word had a way of traveling, even across the empty dark between stars, and somewhere far from Colony Rill, in halls built from black stone and dragon fire, that word had already begun to spread. Gunfire woke the colony an hour before dawn. It started at the eastern fence line, where a group of raiders had cut through the perimeter sensors using stolen alien tech, the kind that should not have been in human hands. By the time Daniel was pulling on his boots, the sky over the eastern fields was already lit up orange, and the colony's warning siren was screaming across the salt flats. He had heard about raiders like these before, groups who took advantage of the shaky peace between humans and the Draska Dominion, striking border colonies where help was slow to arrive, and where nobody looked too closely at where their weapons came from. Rumors said some raider crews had even traded with rogue Draska smugglers, picking up energy weapons far stronger than anything a small mining colony could match. Daniel grabbed his old service rifle from the closet, the one he had not touched in 6 years, and ran for the community hall where Victor was already shouting orders at a crowd of frightened, half-dressed colonists. "They're hitting the water plant," Victor said when he saw Daniel. "If that goes down, we lose the whole east side by morning." Daniel did not wait to hear the rest of the plan. He knew the water plant's layout better than anyone, having helped build half of its pump systems himself. He grabbed 3 volunteers, men barely trained for this kind of fight, and led them out into the dark toward the sound of gunfire. What Daniel did not know was that Daisy had heard the siren too. She had spent years hiding in that underground shelter every time danger came near, trusting Daniel to keep her safe behind thick walls. But tonight, listening to the panic in the colonists' voices through the shelter's old vent system, something in her refused to stay hidden. She was no longer the small, broken creature Daniel had carried home in his arms. She was taller than most doorways now, strong enough to bend metal, and the fear in her chest had slowly, over 3 years, turned into something closer to protectiveness. She broke through the shelter's reinforced door with one hard strike of her tail. By the time Daniel reached the water plant, the raiders had already pinned his group behind a low concrete wall, their weapons far too powerful for his rifle to answer. One of the volunteers had already been hit in the shoulder, and Daniel was reloading with hands that would not stop shaking when a shape dropped out of the darkness above them. Wings spread wide, landing hard enough to crack the pavement. For a moment, everyone froze. Daisy stood between the raiders and the wounded colonists, scales catching the firelight, wings flared out like a shield. She had never fought anyone in her life. She had never even raised her voice at another living creature. But when one of the raiders raised his weapon toward her, some instinct older than anything Daniel had taught her took over. She moved fast, faster than something her size should have been able to move, knocking the weapon aside with one clawed hand before the raider could fire. A burst of heat, not quite fire but something close to it, flared from her throat and scorched the ground near the raider's feet as a warning. It was enough. The man scrambled back, shouting for the others to retreat, and within minutes the whole raiding party was pulling out, unwilling to fight something they did not understand and could not identify. Daniel reached Daisy's side just as the adrenaline left her body all at once, her legs shaking, breath coming in short, uneven bursts. "You could have been killed," he said, voice rough with fear and relief tangled together. "So could you," Daisy answered simply, and there was nothing he could say to argue with that. By morning the colony was safe, the water plant undamaged, and 3 colonists alive who might not have been otherwise. Word of what happened spread fast, faster than Daniel could control. People had seen Daisy. People had watched her stand between them and danger, and gratitude, it turned out, made people talk. What none of them realized was that the colony's old security relay, damaged during the fight and repaired only partially before the raiders fled, had automatically transmitted a burst of footage into the regional network before failing completely. Grainy, incomplete, but unmistakable. A dragon fighting alongside humans in a colony far from Draasa territory. The footage bounced through several relay stations meant for trade route monitoring before reaching a listening post near the Dominion border, the kind of post that existed specifically to catch unusual signals like this one. It did not take long for the report to move up the chain, passed from officer to officer, until it landed on a desk that belonged to someone with the authority to act on it. Daniel spent the days after the attack rebuilding fences and repairing the water plant, trying to convince himself that the footage, whatever had been captured, was too damaged to matter. He wanted to believe the danger had passed. He did not yet know that somewhere far beyond the colony's small sky, in a palace built from black stone and dragon fire, a name from years ago was being spoken again, and a queen who had once signed the order to discard a weak hatchling was now asking her advisors a very different question. Was it possible that Hatchling had survived? The throne room on the Draasa homeworld was not built for comfort. Its walls were carved from black volcanic stone, still warm from the fires that had shaped them centuries ago, and its ceiling stretched high enough to let a full-grown dragon spread her wings without touching the rafters. Queen Thal rarely used the throne itself. She preferred to stand near the great open window at the back of the hall, looking out over the capital, where dragons of every color moved between towers built for wings rather than feet. She was standing there when her chief advisor, an older dragon Named Arabiquau Arabicrat OX with graying scales and a permanent limp from an old war wound, brought her the report. A colonist recording, Vorok said, laying a data slate on the stone ledge beside her. Damaged, but the analysts confirmed it. A juvenile of our kind, fighting alongside humans on a border colony called Rill. Nira did not turn around right away. She had ruled the Dominion for over a decade, long enough to know that most reports of stray hatchlings turned out to be nothing, smugglers exaggerating stories to raise prices, or simple misidentification of unfamiliar wildlife. But something about the location made her pause. Colony Rill sat almost exactly along the drift path a discard pod would have followed 6 years ago, the year a hard famine had forced the council to enforce bloodline purity laws more strictly than usual. The year Nira, still new to the throne and desperate to hold on to the support of the old council members, had signed off on dozens of discard orders without reading most of them closely. It was not something she was proud of. It was something she had spent years trying not to think about. "Show me," she said. The footage was grainy, cut off after only a few seconds, but it was enough. A dragon. Young by the size of her, standing protectively in front of wounded humans, driving off armed attackers with nothing but raw instinct and a body clearly untrained for combat. Nira watched it 3 times before she spoke again. "Pull every discard record from 6 years ago," she said. "Cross-reference drift trajectories with Colony Rill's coordinates." Vorox hesitated. "My queen, even if this creature is one of ours, it was legally discarded under the laws at the time. It has no status, no claim, no protection. Humans harboring it is a violation of the border treaty, but pursuing it publicly would mean admitting the Dominion's discard practices produced survivors. That is not a conversation the Council will want to have." "I am aware of what the Council wants," Nira said, a sharpness entering her voice that made Vorox lower his head slightly. "I did not ask what they want. I asked for the records." The search took 2 days. When the results came back, they narrowed the possibilities to a single hatchling, one whose discard pod had malfunctioned mid-launch and drifted off its intended course toward the deep silence beyond Dominion space, exactly the direction Colony Rill sat in. A weak hatchling, underweight, wing malformation noted at hatching, recommended for discard by unanimous council vote. Nira remembered signing that order. She remembered very little about it beyond the signature itself, one name among dozens on a page she had barely read that week. It bothered her more than she expected, staring at the record now, to realize she could not even recall which advisor had pushed hardest for that particular batch of discards. She sent a single envoy first, not a warship, not a formal delegation, just one trusted scout named Doran, tasked with confirming the rumor quietly before anything official was decided. Doran left within the hour, flying a small unmarked transport toward human space, carrying instructions to observe only and report back before taking any action. Word of the investigation did not stay quiet for long. Whispers moved through the Draasa caught the way they always did, faster than official channels could contain them. Some council members were furious, insisting any confirmed survivor should be quietly eliminated to avoid embarrassment. Others, younger nobles who had grown uncomfortable with the discard tradition for years but lacked the standing to challenge it, saw an opportunity instead. If a discarded hatchling had survived, thrived even, raised by humans no less, it would raise uncomfortable questions about a tradition many already considered outdated and cruel. Nira found herself caught between both factions, unable to decide which outcome she truly wanted. Doran's scout ship reached the outer edge of human territory 6 days later, disguised as a trade vessel, and spent 3 more days quietly gathering information near Colony Rill without making contact. What he found matched the footage exactly. A young dragon, clearly cared for, clearly loved by the humans around her, strong enough to have driven off armed raiders without formal training. Doran recorded everything he could from a safe distance and prepared his report for the flight home. He did not know that Daniel, ever cautious after the raider attack, had installed new sensors around the colony's perimeter, sensors sensitive enough to catch the faint energy signature of a disguised Draasa vessel lingering just outside detection range for 3 days straight. By the time Doran's ship turned back toward Dominion space, Daniel already knew someone had been watching. He gathered Rosa and Victor that same night, laying out everything he suspected, watching the color drain from both their faces as the pieces came together. Somewhere out among the stars, an envoy was carrying proof of Daisy's existence back to a queen who had once ordered her death, and there was no way to know yet whether that queen was coming to finish what she started or to undo it. The ship that arrived over Colony Rill 3 weeks later did not try to hide. It came out of the dark sky like a second sunrise, massive and black, its hull shaped like folded wings frozen mid-flight. Sensors across the colony screamed warnings that nobody needed, because every person standing outside that morning could see the ship with their own eyes, filling half the horizon as it descended toward the open fields near the water plant. Daniel stood in front of his house with Daisy beside him, her claws digging small trenches into the dirt from nervous tension. She was fully grown now, taller than any human, her wings casting long shadows in the early light. But in that moment, she looked younger than he had ever seen her, more like the frightened hatchling from the crashed pod than the young woman who had once faced down armed raiders without hesitation. "Whatever happens," Daniel said quietly, "you are not going anywhere you don't choose to go, not while I'm standing here." Daisy did not answer. She could not seem to find words for the fear tightening in her chest. The Draasa ship landed with barely a sound, its engines cutting the air with practiced precision. A ramp lowered, and figures began stepping out, armored guards first, followed by advisors in dark ceremonial robes, and finally, walking without hurry, without any need to prove her authority through spectacle, came Queen Nira Thal herself. She was larger than Daisy, her scales a deep black that seemed to swallow the morning light, streaked with faint gold along her jaw and wings, marks of royal bloodline that every Draasa recognized on sight. Her eyes moved across the colony slowly, taking in the humans gathered nervously at a distance, the makeshift defenses Victor had ordered built overnight, and finally settling on Daisy. For a long moment, nobody spoke. "You survived," Nira said finally, her voice carrying easily across the open field without needing to be raised. "A discard pod meant for the deep silence, and you survived." "I did," Daisy said, forcing steadiness into her voice that she did not entirely feel. "No thanks to whoever signed the order to leave me there." A ripple of tension moved through the Draasa guards at those words, but Nira raised a single clawed hand, silencing any response before it could begin. That order carried my signature, Nira said. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not insult you by claiming I do not remember what it meant. Daniel stepped forward slightly, placing himself beside Daisy without crowding her, his old rifle slung uselessly over his shoulder, more habit than actual protection against a warship's worth of armed guards. She's not going anywhere against her will, he said, not to be punished for surviving, and not to be paraded around as some kind of trophy either. Nira studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her golden eyes. You are the one who found her. I am. Why? The question was simple, but Daniel understood the weight behind it. He thought of that first night, the crashed pod, the small starving creature curled inside it, too weak to fight, too broken to survive on its own. Because nobody else would, he said. Because something small and helpless doesn't deserve to die alone just because someone decided it wasn't worth saving. Nira was quiet for a long time after that. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its formal edge, replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. Tell me about her, she said. Not the footage, not the reports. Tell me who she became. Daniel spoke carefully, describing the years of hiding, the questions Daisy had asked as a child, the night she broke through a reinforced door to defend colonists she barely knew from armed raiders. Daisy herself added pieces here and there, growing steadier as she spoke, until eventually she was the one addressing Nira directly, no longer hiding behind Daniel's shoulder. I know why the discard tradition exists, Daisy said. Bloodline purity, resource scarcity, all of it. But I also know I wasn't given a chance to prove I could have been strong because nobody bothered to wait and see. This colony gave me that chance instead. Humans gave me that chance. Nira's advisors shifted uncomfortably at the boldness of her words, several exchanging glances that suggested they expected their queen to respond harshly. Instead, Nira lowered her head slightly, an unmistakable gesture of respect among her kind. The tradition that discarded you, she said, was built on fear disguised as strength. I inherited it. I enforced it without question, because questioning it seemed dangerous at the time. She paused, glancing briefly at her uneasy advisors before continuing. Watching you now, I find myself questioning it regardless. She turned back to Daniel, studying him with an intensity that made him straighten his shoulders instinctively. I did not come here to reclaim what was discarded, Nira said. I came to see what survived despite everything working against it. I have seen enough. Daniel felt Daisy's tension ease slightly beside him, though neither of them fully relaxed, uncertain what the Queen's words truly meant for their future. I have a proposal, Nira continued, addressing both of them now, her voice carrying the weight of someone thinking out loud rather than issuing formal decree. One that does not involve taking her from this colony or from you. One that might, if we are careful, change more than just her fate alone. Behind her, the advisors began murmuring among themselves, some clearly displeased, others cautiously intrigued. Daniel glanced at Daisy, unsure what came next, but for the first time since the massive ship had appeared over the colony that morning, he allowed himself a small measure of hope. The council chamber built into the side of Nira's warship was smaller than the throne room back home, but it held just as much weight in the air. Daniel had never expected to find himself sitting inside a Draasa vessel, surrounded by advisors whose expressions ranged from curious to openly hostile. But here he was, with Daisy beside him and Victor standing stiffly near the door, representing the colony's interests as best he could. Nira sat at the head of the table, no formal throne here, just a simple stone seat that put her at eye level with everyone present. She had spent the last hour explaining her proposal in pieces, testing reactions, adjusting details, until finally she laid out the whole of it plainly. The discard tradition will be reviewed, she said, publicly before the full council, using Daisy's survival as evidence that our current laws fail to account for potential we discard out of fear rather than genuine necessity. This will not be quiet. It will not be comfortable. Many will resist it. One of the older advisors, a dragon with scars along his jaw from decades of council debates, leaned forward sharply. You intend to use a human-raised hatchling to challenge centuries of tradition. The council will see this as weakness, not reform. The council will see what I show them, Neera said, her tone leaving no room for argument. And what I intend to show them is proof that our fear-based traditions cost us more than they protect. She turned to Daniel next. In exchange for standing before the council and speaking honestly about what you witnessed, I am prepared to offer Colony real formal recognition under Dominion trade protection, along with resources currently withheld from border settlements due to treaty restrictions. This is not charity, this is acknowledgement of debt. Daniel exchanged a glance with Victor, who gave a small, uncertain nod. It was more than the colony had ever been offered by either government, human, or Draasa in all the years since the border had been drawn. But Neera was not finished. She looked to Daisy last, her golden eyes steady and searching. And you, she said, must decide for yourself what role you wish to play in this, if any. I will not order you to stand before the council. That choice, more than any other, belongs entirely to you. Daisy sat with that question for a long moment, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. She thought of the years spent hidden in an underground shelter, afraid of engines passing overhead. She thought of the night she broke through a reinforced door because staying hidden while others were in danger had felt impossible. She thought of Daniel's voice in the dark, telling her she was not broken, not weak, simply because someone else's rules had said otherwise. I'll do it, she said finally, not because I owe the Dominion anything, I don't, but because somewhere out there might be another hatchling in a pod drifting toward nothing, and if speaking up means that stops happening, then it's worth doing. Neera studied her for a long moment, something that looked almost like pride flickering behind her composed expression. Spoken like someone who understands exactly what she is offering, she said quietly. The council session, when it finally happened 3 weeks later, was every bit as difficult as Neera had warned. Daisy stood before rows of skeptical, sometimes openly hostile council members, answering questions about her upbringing, her abilities, her loyalty, questions meant to trap her into proving their assumptions correct. She answered every one calmly, honestly, refusing to shrink under pressure the way some of the older nobles clearly expected. Daniel spoke as well, describing the crash, the years of hiding, the raider attack, refusing to soften any part of the story to make it more comfortable for his audience. Victor, surprising everyone including himself, stood and spoke briefly about what Colony Rill had gained from Daisy's presence, framing her not as an exception to Draasa weakness, but as proof of Draasa potential ignored. The vote that followed was not unanimous. Reform rarely is. But it passed, narrow and contested, opening a formal review of the discard tradition that would take years to fully resolve, but had, for the first time in generations, actually begun. In the months that followed, Daisy did not choose to leave Colony Rill behind, nor did she choose to abandon her connection to the world she had been born into. Instead, she found herself moving between both, spending weeks at a time in Dominion space, helping shape new policies alongside reform-minded nobles, then returning home to Daniel's small house on the edge of the Salt Flats, where Rosa still checked in twice a month, and Victor still grumbled about the extra paperwork her fame brought to his desk. On a quiet evening, nearly a year after Neera's ship had first darkened the colony's sky, Daniel stood outside his workshop, watching Daisy address a small gathering of both human colonists and visiting Draasa dignitaries near the old crash site, now marked with a simple stone marker instead of scattered wreckage. She spoke easily now, comfortable in a role neither species had ever expected her to fill, bridging two worlds that had spent decades barely speaking to each other at all. He thought back to that first night, kneeling in the dirt beside a broken, starving creature that everyone else had already given up on. He had not saved her because he expected any of this. He had saved her because leaving something helpless to die alone had never sat right with him, war veteran or not. Everything that followed, the alliance, the reform, the strange and unexpected peace slowly building between two worlds, had grown from that one small decision made in the dark, with nothing but a flashlight and a stubborn refusal to walk away. The hatchling no one wanted had become the bridge nobody expected, and Daniel, watching quietly from a distance as always, found that he would not have changed a single choice that led them here.